In 2024, a study was completed in which they investigated the Oudbe region of North Africa. What they found was extremely surprising. An entire farm, round about 5000 BC to around 4000 BC. This is extremely surprising because it is one of the earliest African farming areas, and it even goes near the dates of the Nile regions. But the second thing that is surprising about it is how close it is to the Iberians, and that trade must have started at an earlier time than this between North Africans and people in Europe. This trade also further expanded to the southern parts, as is shown by other conclusions. Egypt also seems to have played a role, though evidence is lacking for the complete communication between Egypt and Oudbe. This farming site that has been discovered changes almost everything about North Africa. Of course, we know North Africa as a desert area, and this desert area lacking real fruit for farming. But we know that they did have farms because, of course, people have been living there for thousands of years. But because of the complex environment, it invites itself to trade long distance. If we read this short abstract, then we can get a sort of idea of what we're talking about here. So the Maghreb in Northwest Africa played an important role during the Paleolithic and later in connecting the Western Mediterranean from the Phoenician to Islamic period, yet knowledge of its later prehistory is limited, particularly between 4000 and 1000 BC. Here, the authors present the first result of investigations at Oudbe, Morocco, revealing a hitherto unknown farming society dated to 3400 to 2900 BC. This is currently the earliest and largest agricultural complex in Africa beyond the Nile corridor. Pottery and lithics, together with numerous pits, point to a community that brings the Maghreb into dialogue with contemporaneous wider Western Mediterranean developments. One of the things the study explores is the fact that people who lived in North Africa made their way most certainly into the Iberian areas, and that it is easy to see, even genetically, that a form of DNA called E1B1A made its way all the way from Africa into Europe. And this early DNA that has entered that region, that we can see in places as far south as the Swahili regions and as far north as Egypt and Morocco, although it is mostly excluded within West Africa, it can be seen all over the North African regions, and of course within the Iberians, with specifically an individual that is discovered in that area. Now, tools have been found all over North Africa, but in this specific area, they've found tools of all kinds. And then, of course, they found pottery of all kinds, some pointing to great trade and great migration. So let's continue to read. In this article, we present results of a new fieldwork in Morocco demonstrating that one part of the Maghreb does provide remarkable evidence for farming, aggregation, long-range connectivity, and probably storage within this time frame. Attributes that collectively suggest complex social relationships. The northwestern Maghreb position between the Atlantic and Mediterranean weather systems, together with the proximity to the Atlas Mountain range, ensures adequate rainfall and significantly ameliorated the aridification observed over much of northern Africa from the 4th millennium BC onwards, enabling it to remain fully viable for agriculture. Here, moreover, among other isolated, poorly dated finds, a long known distribution of mid to late 3rd millennium BC pottery and metalwork of Southwest European beaker types, together with numerous finds of African ivory and ostrich eggshells in Copper Age Iberia, manifestly demand wider investigation. Recently, the scant archaeological evidence has been complemented by genetic analysis revealing a mixed population ancestry of local hunter gatherers, Neolithic Iberian farmers, and Saharan pastoralists, while also identifying an individual of African descent buried at the late Copper Age Beaker period site of Camino de las Yeseras in the Iberian interior. So far missing, however, has been any substantive understanding of the Maghrebian societies involved. To date, most information derives from caves and cemeteries with problematic dating. Prioritizing open living sites has the potential to transform the situation. So basically, what we're reading here is that there is a full migration with things like ostriches and ostrich eggs, ivory, and stuff like that, which is not found locally in this North African area, but being traded from this North African area. That's the speculation, and ending up in the Iberian regions. And then going backwards are Iberian level metals that make their way into North Africa. So if you look at this provided, these are made by locals, by the way, of this region. But if you look at them, the thing that they're trying to show is that all of them have completely unique styles, meaning that there were multiple styles of pottery. This isn't desperately creating pottery and then you have one style because you've just discovered pottery. Instead, what seems to have happened is that there's a long age history of pottery, and we will get into the fact that they have way bigger evidence of farming. But here's another second thing about it is that there is in the farming there is cows, sheep, pigs, and all of that. But if we go to the pottery, you can see here in the second one that there is holes on this pottery. This is to put strings to carry. Now we remember that Africa, North Africa, has a lot of people who migrate from one place to another anyway. This is one of the things that happens. This is evidence that this place is different, that this place is sedentary, that this place is settled, and the people who lived here probably did not move a lot, with a small amount of people who would trade and then bring everything back to this one region. We know this, of course, because we find things like storage units and stuff like that, which of course these storage units would be more far dispersed if this was a nomadic culture. But instead, it seems that it's comparable to ancient Egypt. Now, one of the things that excites people is that whenever you see farms like this, whenever there's people living in this manner, what pops up immediately? Well, farming, as we know, is the mother of civilization. And so when you have farms, and this is interesting that you have it in this region, you start to have things like pottery, you start to have things like pits and stairs and mounds, and these things start to lead you into having a civilization of your own. And since you don't have to wake up every day and chase sheep and or chase wild animals, then you can focus more on survival on thriving rather than survival. This includes inventing. So let's continue to read so that we can get further context of what was discovered. So far, we have generated 13 radiocarbon dates, all on charcoal or seeds recovered from our own excavations, OBAPs, cleaning of earlier trenches, and from materials recovered by earlier French Moroccan excavations. Most of the samples derive from deep pits that are widely encountered in the trenches across the northern half of the ridge. The dates from widely separated pits consistently indicate a range of 3,400 to 2,900 BC, which of course is very early and would be about the same time that ancient Egypt was thriving, at 95% confidence, with the exception of two earlier 4th millennium BC dates and one with significantly later end date 2700 BC. This result matches the stylistic homogeneity of much of the prehistoric pottery recovered from the site. We'll get back to what that means. Given these dates and distinctive associated cultural traits, as well as uncertainties around the definition of the antecedent regional middle and late Neolithic, we propose that the phase of activity at Oud Bet be referred to as a regional final Neolithic, thereby filling one of the hitherto most obscure phases of Maghrebian history. So let's quickly talk about what they're trying to say here, which is they're saying that this date is not a fluke, and that if it does range, it only ranges by a couple hundred years, and that the things that are being developed here, homogeneity, you can see there, are all sort of things that come directly from this one culture itself. Now, some of the oldest findings over here go back to the 70s. So this isn't like a new site in terms of finding anything in this region. What is new is that now it is connected to a greater civilization or a greater human population that already existed, a site that is starting to put in more and more evidence. Now, remember these deep pits as well, which we find all over the world when you start to see things, but these deep pits do start to separate from the normal cave life that a lot of people live when they live as hunter gatherers. In other words, you're having people purposefully live beyond caves and stuff like that. And this is a separation because, of course, we find cave art all over North Africa, which shows us that there are a lot of people who were living in caves at that time. You can call them Neolithic if you want, you can call them whatever you want to call them, but they were living in caves. This is a departure. So I'm going to skip the parts about how they discovered this, but you can look it up yourself. But let's carry on. The pits were encountered in every trench and average approximately 1 per 10 meters squared. Should this density prove typical across the entire site, a question for upcoming geophysics and testing trenches, there are significant volumetric consequences. The contradicted mouths of the pits may suggest an initial use as storage silos, potentially for crops, a traditional North African practice until recently. Although this hypothesis requires further investigation, given that the pits fills probably do not reflect their primary use, but instead formal or informal waste disposal. This issue finds parallels in the debate around the storage, refuse, and the ritual functions of similarly shaped and numerous pits in contemporary southern Iberia, a resonance to which we will return. During intensive surface survey in 2022, we collected pottery, chipped stone, axes, and macrolithic at a 10 by 10 meter resolution over 19.5 HA, generating the first fine grained definition of the extent of the site and the distribution of material classes within it. The resulting total of 19,626 finds comprises 16,258 pottery fragments, 2,947 chip stone pieces, 50 axes, and 371 macrolithics. The main focus of final Neolithic activity emerges as a 9 to 10 HA zone of high artifact density across the north and of the site, with convincingly delineated edges, save for losses to cliff erosion in currently known distribution of pits, though somewhat smaller than a previously published estimate prior to OBAP's fieldwork. A smaller discrete concentration of prehistoric materials near the large built features to the south also appears to be a final Neolithic and or slightly broader prehistoric date, possibly including the Beaker period. The concentration of pottery and lithics at Oud Bet is of a size unprecedented at this date on the African continent outside the Nile corridor and its immediate vicinity, and is also exceptional in Mediterranean terms. So basically, what they're trying to say is this area right here has given so much evidence that it is beyond. I mean, that's why I was reading it, but it is beyond um, what we usually expect from Africa, because in Africa we do find pottery, it's pretty old, but you'll get 10, 20. So it's not that widely spread in those regions. But even comparing it to places like the Mediterranean, where there are a lot of tools, this place is exceptional because it yields so many things. And you can see here on the map that they show. So, grinding tools with the color purple, you see it's all over the area. Rotary querns, pounding tools. These are all stone tools, by the way. Hammering tools, abrading, polishing, burnishing tools, other tools, grinding an anvil. This is the level of uh, deepness that we can find in this area. And obviously, it's exciting when you think about how limited the information we have about North Africa is. This also must remind us about the reality that these people lived as well. I mean, today we sort of forget, but back in the day, the way that you created weapons, the things that you got that sort of worked with you have to use old tools like stone that is freely available. I mean, especially in that type of area, which is freely available, and you have to start grinding food. You have to start. This is the history of the world, that stone tools were just a thing that were used. Even in Egypt, we see stone tools used even in the later years. And that is the surprising thing about uh, what we see historically. We would expect more sophistication, but it's a slow start. So let's continue to read. One strategic aim in 2022 was to obtain initial insight into final Neolithic substantive practices. Pit 222 in Trench 2 was accordingly excavated, revealing a rapidly deposited lower fill containing large sherds of fine final Neolithic vessels and fragmented grinding tools and upper fills from gradual natural processes, with pottery of comparable date and no later intrusions. Wet sieving of the pit's content produced charred seeds of domesticated naked barley and more rarely wheat, alongside wild olive and pistachio, probably representing food processing residues. Samples of the first three species have been radiocarbon dated. Analysis of faunal remains confirms the presence of domestic goats alongside sheep, cattle, pig, and a single equid tooth with all the main carcass parts represented and cut marks suggestive of butchery on site. These results match initial observations of the site overall faunal profile, which is dominated by domesticated rather than wild species. So, what you're seeing here is further a bigger picture of the type of domestication and the type of sedentary lifestyle that is in this area. I mean, they're trying to tell you that wild animals are basically out at this point and that it's all domestication. These results match initial observation of the site's overall faunal profile, which is dominated by domestication rather than wild species, given that wild bovids and suids were indigenous to the Holocene Maghreb. Some diversity of the status within these taxa cannot at present be ruled out. The untapped, okay, so what they're basically saying is uh these farming animals, a lot of them, the bovid, we'll get back to what that means, says that it is possible that some of the animals come from a foreign origin and that this foreign origin might be further uh mixed in with local animals that were available in the region. But as of now, they're accepting that there is a native thing going on, but we'll get back to that. Some diversity of the status within the taxa cannot at present be ruled out. The untapped potential of Maghrebian later prehistoric is exemplified within this one modestly sized pit, which has alone produced the most reliable evidence for agriculture in the region for almost 2 millennia on either side of the site's late fourth millennium floret. Provided here are some images. So this is the subsurface investigations and what they yielded, and you can see here the different layers: 3,700 BC. And even though this study is very important, there's always been indication of farming and pottery and all of that in this region. It's just now you're having more and more evidence come together. Now, hopefully, this could happen for other parts of Africa, as even in this study, they talk about yet. This is what we found as of yet. So, as we continue to read, the sample of the material culture recovered from Oudbet is substantial. Here we report only their prehistoric material, though the surface survey, unlike the excavation, also retrieved considerable quantities of medieval and later pottery, along with rotary querns of volcanic stone. Some 1,295 prehistory sherds were recovered from stratified context in the trenches 1 and 2, a range of round based jars, bowls, and other open shaped are mainly made on of a buff firing clay, variably sometimes finely levigated, while shallow cooking plates are typically of a red brown fabric. Some vessels are large with massive tunnel lugs and or handles. Approximately 25% of the pottery, mainly in the buff fabric, is slipped red, brown, or dark and burnished, sometimes to high luster. In addition, dark on light painted pottery constitutes 1 to 7% of counts per context. This otherwise little known type has rare, broadly contemporaneous parallels at Gar Kahal in northwest Morocco and at multiple sites in southern Iberia, Aranda Gimens. Overall, the degree of ceramic technology sophistication is strikingly relative to other early Maghrebian pottery. The survey pottery complements this picture, confirming the extent of final Neolithic material, including painted sherds, as well as adding hints of the earlier Neolithic presence in the north and patchy post final Neolithic activity of the north and south near the linear built features. The macrolithic assemblage is overwhelmingly prehistoric. Most examples were collected by surface survey, with only 13 from excavations. The vast majority of the surface finds associated with the final Neolithic focus in the north, only 31 are from the south, mainly close to the built features. Most 53.6% consist of grinding implements, probably for cereal processing. Many tools were also reused as anvils, including which, together with those solely used for hammering, testified to extensive on site manufacturing. That is the important part there, including the first storage of lithic artifacts, knapping by bipolar percussions, tools for pounding, abrading, burnishing, and polishing, as well as possible pallets, are attested in smaller numbers. A single pick parallels those previously reported at the site by Soville and presently curated at Rabat Museum. The prehistoric macroliths are mostly made from sandstone and quartzitic sandstones, mainly sourced from cobbles and boulders locally available along the riverbed or in the conglomerate exposures of the ridge. Rarer raw materials include basalt, schist, breccia, limestone, and granitoid rocks. Traces of manufacture, knapping, pecking, and grinding can be detected on several artifacts, especially the grinding implements. So finally, we just move on, and there's an interpretation of this, but then I want to save that for another video. Addressing the long known but little studied site of Old Bet through fieldwork and related analysis produced both new insights into Maghrebian society and many further questions. Prominent among the former are the undeniable presence of established farming lifestyle in the late 4th millennium BC Maghreb and a complex local communities re reciprocity engaged with their contemporaries in southern Iberia. Our hope is that, however challenging it may prove to resolve some of the outstanding questions, Outbet and the Northwest Maghreb will henceforth occupy the integral and, in explanatory terms, profoundly revisionary place in the later prehistory of the Mediterranean and Africa that they so richly deserve, and that for far too many years has gone unrecognized. I want to say, by the way, that there is a growing understanding of African civilizations. And so we have a lot to look forward to because people are starting to investigate deeper and deeper. And they're starting to talk about. Now, there's a part in this study that I didn't read. They talk about Dar Tishit. Now, if you remember, Dar Tishit is the site where they found ancient things in this very same country, and these ancient uh, science foundations of a site might be also related to this, and this is why there's a greater connectivity. And although this area never got to the size of ancient Egypt, there is still signs that these people are, because of their farming, a growing civilization. So Africa as a whole benefits from information like this telling us of how big and how connected we were to the greater world, which I think is much bigger than we can ever think. Of course, ivory has been found in the Iberian regions. That's from Africa, as we read, and even ostrich shells, which tells you about, the availability of them in those countries. But, we'll get that in another time. So like, share, subscribe. Bye bye.